And we're going to move from that now to something even more subliminally important, and that is, of course, going to the cinema. Who else to ask about that than Grant Harrold, the Royal Butler, the king of etiquette, the man who knows what modern manners are all about. Grant, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, sir. King of Etiquette. I love it.
I think that's nice. I like it a lot. I think that crown will stick with you. Now, I don't know if you're a frequent cinema goer. I don't particularly go an awful lot. I go mostly with my kids to see kind of, those kind of Avengers movies and things like that. And it used to be Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and all of that. But you know what? My biggest problem in the cinema is falling asleep. Which people hate, right? Because partly because I get enveloped in the sort of the darkness, and whenever you switch the lights off for me, I just sort of tend to doze off.
It's like you're ready to have your 40 wings. And I'm like you. I don't always go to the cinema. I will be going in September because of a set in Downton Abbey.
Oh yes,
but I don't often go. But the thing that is interesting about cinema etiquette, so people don't realise that there's kind of rules that still apply if you go to the cinema or even the theatre. I think falling asleep's not it's not a massive thing. Unless you hasten past, if you snore, that might be a little bit of a problem.
Depends how busy the cinema is, I think, whether people don't mind it or not,
Well, and I think, but the biggest, obviously, from this thing that we've been reading, the biggest things are people kicking the back of seats.
Yes.
I'm hoping that's kids and not adults, but I say hoping. I mean, it shouldn't be done regardless, but you kind of assume if it's youngsters that are suddenly getting a bit agitated or something, they're going to kick. But then, obviously, and I'm not a parent, I'll quickly add that as well, but obviously it's important that parents teach the children not to do that. And then it's other things like mobile phones. Often are you in the cinema? Do you know what? Not just the cinema. I went to the theatre a few months ago, and somebody actually sat there throughout the actual show on their mobile phone, and I think that really shocked me.
That's amazing, isn't it? I'm surprised somebody didn't stop them from doing it, because I was at a show not that long ago with my son, and they said, please switch all your phones off, and everybody did, and actually I was amazed when I looked around the auditorium, there wasn't anyone on their phone.
There wasn't anybody. No. I think that's really good. Unfortunately, in the cinema, it's not, and again, it's the younger generation. They're always kind of looking at them. They're always wanting to stay in touch. And unfortunately, that's where it goes a bit wrong. Because even if you've got it on silent, there's still that glow.
Yes.
You still see this kind of halo around somebody as if it's as if they're busy channeling something. So I think it's important that when you're at the cinema, it's just kind of bearing those little things, just being respectful of other people and realising that other people are there to enjoy the movie, and they don't want to have people looking at phones or dare I say, eating loudly or spilling popcorn or chit-chatting during the movie. So it's kind of bearing these things in mind.
Oh, I think it is. Well, it's like everything else that we talk about, Grant, isn't it? It's just having a bit of consideration for your fellow man and fellow woman, because in the end, you're in a public space, you're sharing an experience, and it's not as if you're sitting in your living room where you can do whatever you like.
No, exactly. And I must add, it did make me smile when you said about falling asleep, because I did, again, a couple of years ago, I went to see a show of a friend, quite a well-known actress, Judi Dench.
Oh, yes.
And sitting next to me was Richard E. Grant. And he actually fell asleep. and I remember kind of thinking, is it rude to wake him up?
Well, no, that's a very good etiquette point, isn't it?
The next question is, because obviously he then did wake up, and then you feel, obviously there's the embarrassment, you've suddenly dozed off for a second. In fairness, he might have been busy or whatever, but again, it's that thing, especially at a theatre. If you're on a stage, and when I was younger, I did what's it called, tread the boards.
Oh yes.
You do look out to the audience, as you probably regularly do. You look out to the audience, and you notice if somebody's falling asleep, if somebody's on a mobile phone, if somebody's chatting, if somebody's just not even got any interest. And I have heard recently, and I can't remember where, but there's been one or two performers that have actually called people out for.
They have. They have, and quite often in quite a rude way from the stage, which people would actually not mind at all. I think they would be quite happy to watch them do that to somebody else. It's quite entertaining. But yeah, I mean, I think probably in Richard E. Grant's case, and anybody's case who goes to the theatre, it's best not to be over-refreshed, I think, when you go in.
I think that's it. As you said, it is. I'm not saying it is easily done. I mean, the reality is you go into that environment and you see you have had a busy day. It is easy to kind of fall asleep. But I think if you're with friends, I wouldn't mind if I haven't actually fallen asleep. If I did and somebody nudged me, I wouldn't be offended. I'd probably be a bit kind of, I hope nobody noticed.
Now, I can safely say to you, Grant, and this is not intended to shock you, that I have definitely committed probably one of the worst ever crimes in a cinema, right?
No,
and it's a long time ago, but it's in the days, and you say this to people and they can't quite believe it, when you could still smoke in the cinema, right? And I was a smoker at the time.
Yeah.
And I was sitting behind a couple of people. And they used to have these little ashtrays in between the seats. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
They were little sort of half-moon-shaped ashtrays where you put your cigarette out, right? Now, I went to put my cigarette out in this ashtray. Unbeknownst to me, the young woman in front of me had very long hair, and the hair had sort of cascaded behind the seat. And I actually set fire to her hair. Can you imagine?
No, it's
I mean, her hair just kind of went up in flames.
Did you do, I mean, I'm just thinking of etiquette now, did you kind of pass a bucket of water?
Well, I just kind of, me and the person I was with just very quickly tried to sort of just dampen it and just hit it basically, put it out, because it was actually on fire. I mean, it was horrendous, really, and it smelled terrible.
It is quite, I didn't have quite that happen to me many years ago when I was in a science laboratory or whatever it's called. And I remember one of my fellow students was, I don't know if they still have those, what are they called, burners, some sort of burners, Bunsen burners.
Oh, Bunsen burners, yeah.
And he was leaning over, and likewise he stood up, and it was like something out of a comedy sketch. Because suddenly there was a stream of kind of fire coming from the top of his head.
Yeah.
And immediately I think we just got some water over him, and luckily he wasn't even, there was no burning or anything. I mean, he was so lucky. But again, it's that thing in a I'm thinking from a kind of ethical point of view, when a crisis happens, if you're with somebody and that happens, people don't want, it's extraordinary, they don't want to suddenly disturb somebody. So even if their hair's on fire, they're probably thinking, oh, did I say something? Well, yes, you certainly say something. You, as I said, you obviously get something to put it out, and if it is a case of a bucket of water, then fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another good reason why they banned smoking from these places. Thank goodness for that.
Well, it's quite interesting, because I remember as a kid also going to the theatre and people were able to smoke everywhere. I mean, obviously now, could you imagine?
Well, I mean, when I used to go to school, people smoked on the tube. You know, I tell people now, they can look at you like you've gone mad. You know, really? Are you serious?
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got these new, what are these things that they call, because I'm not a smoker, so I'm not 100% sure, these things they smoke instead.
Vaping?
Vapors,
yes.
Vaping. I always think that sounds interesting. People say they're vaping. I remember the first time I heard it, I thought it was something to do with vampires or something. And obviously they didn't explain what it was. And look, I think it's fantastic. If people can get off smoking and go into vaping, great. But there is also vaping etiquette, which I actually remember commenting on a couple of years ago. And as I said, I could never remember what it was ever called. But I did say that it's the same rules as smoking. If you're vaping, you're still obviously giving off some sort of smoke signals, if you like. So you need to just be aware that if other people are around you, that you're doing it in an open environment, an outdoor environment, because people take offence to this kind of thing as well.
They do.
And hopefully they don't do it in the in a cinema or a theatre.
No, it's interesting though, Grant. That's a very good point, because we'll talk about that, I'm sure, another time. Grant Harrold, they're the Royal Butler, Butler to the stars, Butler to the royal family, of course, and a man who is, as I said, the king of etiquette. Funnily enough, it's true. We should do something about vaping, because I've noticed more and more people are now starting to do vaping in places they're not meant to do it. Because if they're not blowing loads and loads of smoke and vapour around the place, it's quite discreet and you can get away with it. Someone was doing it on a train the other day, and I didn't bother saying you can't do that here, largely because the bloke was about 6'8" and looked as if he was in the army.